On September the 1st, Sky Television launched Sky Multi-Channels, an exciting package consisting of your satellite favorites, Sky One, UK Gold and the Children's Channel, with great new channels to Astra viewers such as Nickelodeon, the Family Channel, the Discovery Channel, Bravo, Country Music Television, UK Living, and now, satellite's first shopping channel, QVC. Movie subscribers receive all the Sky multi-channels free. If you're not a movie subscriber or you've not yet subscribed to the Sky multi-channels package, you'll need a viewing card. Call now on 0506 484567 and we'll send you your personal Sky multi-channels viewing card and subscription form immediately, and you'll be able to receive all the Sky multi-channels. Call 0506 484567 for your viewing card now.
From the Sky Satellite Network, this is Sky News.
Germany gives Maastricht the go-ahead. Treaty in force by November 1. Chancellor warned the economy won't tolerate tax rises. And the Northern Ireland Secretary condemns the latest Belfast killing.
This is News at 3 with Tim Marshall.
Good afternoon. Britain has given a cautious welcome to a German ruling which clears the way for the Maastricht Treaty to be ratified. The German Supreme Court decided the treaty was legal, thereby allowing the country to be the last in Europe to sign it. A spokesman from the Foreign Office in London welcomed the decision but said they still have to see the full text of the judgment. Germany's foreign minister said the treaty can now formally go into effect on November the 1st.
Today's ruling by the German Supreme Court that the Maastricht Treaty does not violate Germany's own constitution means that all 12 European member states are now in a position to ratify the treaty and that it'll come into law shortly. The challenge was brought by Manfred Brunner, a former senior Brussels bureaucrat who argued that Maastricht was undemocratic and would violate the strictures for democratic systems laid on Germany after the last World War. In recent weeks, he'd been the last hope of the British Eurosceptics, but now those hopes are dashed.
It's tragic because this is the end of the road on Maastricht. It'll now go ahead and people will see for themselves what happens. I only hope for our country's sake that the fears I have are wrong and the government's views are correct. It's going to cost us all a great deal of cash. It's going to mean that many of the economic policies we used to decide will now be determined in Brussels. And I just think it's tragic that such a fundamental change has been pushed through without the people having a chance to be informed.
But now the treaty, agreed by John Major almost 2 years ago, will come into force across Europe on November the 1st. Britain will have its opt-outs on joining a single currency and on avoiding the European Social Charter. But a special meeting of European heads to celebrate Maastricht will now be scheduled for the end of the month. There, John Major will come under pressure from champions of union, but he'll argue there's no point in talking about that until Europe can agree with the Americans over world trade. Adam Bolton, Sky News.
The so-called Seven Wise Men, Britain's panel of economic advisers to the Treasury, have finished their pre-budget meeting with the Chancellor Kenneth Clarke. One of the leading members, Professor Patrick Minford, told Sky News that he believes the economy will suffer if there's a round of tax increases in the November budget. He also called for an immediate interest rate cut of 1% to stimulate the recovery.
I think it is fragile. The situation in our main export market, Europe, is parlous. And the European continent is in a very bad way with high labor costs, very low competitiveness, and a very severe recession. So there's quite clear need for us to remain competitive in that market and to see a very competitive pound and low interest rates to underpin our domestic demand situation. So 1% and possibly another 1% to follow soon after. In Japan, they're down to 2%, or 1.75%, in fact, and may have to fall further. So there's really no limit to how far they may need to be cut in order to underpin this recovery.
On the eve of the anniversary of the announcement of the pit closure programme, there's been a warning that other mines may close. The chairman of British Coal says he's pessimistic about the survival of 11 pits currently being offered to private buyers. Neil Clark warned against false optimism about the sites, which have already ceased production. Analysts are now saying there could be just 15 working pits by the spring of next year.
For thousands of miners, the statement from British Coal's chief executive seems to throw into doubt a year of marches, petitions and political protests. 11 of the pits, which were reprieved during the government's coal industry review, have now ceased operating and are being offered to private investors. But Mr. Clark isn't optimistic.
The position has not improved, and therefore one has to be very cautious but pessimistic about the future for those pits. After all, I think 21 of them have already and sadly closed. And so I cannot be optimistic. I can't hold out false optimism for the survival of those pits.
It's almost a year since Michael Heseltine announced his original closure plans, and 6 months since the Energy White Paper offered some new hope of a future. But for all of 1993, the nuclear industry has continued to offer stiff competition, while the electricity companies have continued the so-called dash for gas, with new stations coming on stream. Faced with seemingly inexorable decline, half of Britain's miners have now taken the redundancy payments and left the industry for good. One of the most vocal supporters of the industry on the Tory backbenches, the Batley and Spence MP Elizabeth Peacock, today announced that the battle to save pits continued, and she's expressed her outrage at British Coal doubling its imports while pit after pit ceased operations. Union leaders have been rather more forthright, claiming the announcement from Mr. Clark proves the government has hoodwinked miners and their supporters. Now industry analysts are warning that just 15 pits could remain open by the spring of next year. Dennis Vaughan, Sky News.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew, says he's horrified and angered by the latest killing in Northern Ireland. This morning, gunmen opened fire on a van carrying 8 men as they arrived for work at the city's Harbour estate. 1 man was shot dead, 3 others wounded. The victims are all from nationalist West Belfast.
The victims were on their way to work as painters in Belfast's Harbour estate. Their van was trailed by gunmen in a blue Astra car. When the van pulled up at traffic lights, 2 gunmen leapt from the car and opened fire with automatic weapons, riddling it with bullets before fleeing on foot. The driver was hit on the leg but managed to drive into the estate. As forensic experts searched the scene for clues, police sealed off exits from the area. The injured were taken to the Royal Victoria Hospital. They're still undergoing surgery for leg, chest and arm injuries. Several features point to this being a sectarian attack against Catholics. Senior unionist, the Reverend Martin Smith, wants loyalist and Republican violence to stop. He says that Sinn Féin could feature in negotiations if there was convincing proof that IRA violence had stopped.
We want clear evidence that they've turned their backs upon terror and violence and are prepared to work democratically and politically. If they do that, then I believe there are many people that may not agree with them. I don't agree with other political parties. I don't see eye to eye with every politician. But that doesn't say that I should cut them off, that I should not talk to them. I believe that there are many in Ulster who would be prepared even to discuss with those with whom they were politically at odds in the well-being of Northern Ireland.
In Dublin, meanwhile, the Irish Prime Minister and his deputy have been briefing Cabinet colleagues on the Hume-Adams talks. The full Cabinet is expected to give its approval. Gary Honeyford, Sky News, Belfast.
The threat of a national strike by firefighters has been lifted. Both sides in the dispute are now expected to settle on a pay formula involving a 1.4% increase. That's just below the government's 1.5% limit for public sector workers. The figure was released as the Fire Brigades Union and local authority employers met in London for talks over this year's wage claim. 31 disgraced English soccer fans are back in Britain after being deported in handcuffs by Dutch police. Their arrests follow a night of drunkenness and violence in Amsterdam, where the England soccer team is preparing for their World Cup match against Holland. The Home Secretary Michael Howard said the behaviour of the fans was disgraceful.
Michael Howard is hitting back at the hooligans by urging Dutch police to take the troublemakers to court. But most of those arrested last night are now back in Britain. Only 8 fans remain in custody in Holland. Violence flared in Amsterdam's red light district last night, and today 31 of those who went on the rampage were shipped home to Harwich. From there, Essex police escorted them on a train to London. Concealing their identity from the cameras, the fans remained defiant, but the Home Secretary is equally determined to fight back.
What we're going to do is where we can identify people who have misbehaved in Holland, We will notify the authorities in the United States so that they can take action to stop people getting into the United States to watch the finals next year.
Security for tonight's match is tight, but throughout Amsterdam it's the bars and clubs which are bracing themselves for violence. Ian Leckie, Sky News.
You're with Sky News at 3 o'clock. Still to come, the ANC president's cool response to the threat of a South African referendum.